There are moments when a quiet force inside us stirs, not out of logic, but from a feeling so primal, so old, it defies explanation. Perhaps that's why you're here. Maybe the word empath triggered something forgotten, something buried. But let's be clear, this is not about sentimentality or delicate emotions. No, what we're exploring reaches far deeper. Beneath the polite language of sensitivity lies something ancient, something that doesn't just feel, but transforms. To call someone an empath today often evokes the image of a kind soul who picks up on others' moods, but this portrayal is incomplete, if not misleading. The true empath is not merely receptive, they are a conduit through which the unconscious forces of the collective surge. They absorb the unspoken, the hidden, the denied, not as a choice, but as a function of their being. And unless they awaken to this role, they risk being consumed by it. Imagine someone who doesn't just feel sadness in a room, but who unknowingly inherits generational grief from people they've never met. That's the depth we're speaking of. Empaths often walk the world with the burden they don't recognize as foreign. They carry emotional weight that is not their own, and yet it shapes their identity, distorts their path. Before we go further, take a moment. If this resonates with you, pause the scroll and subscribe, because this space is for you. A place to explore not just who you are, but what you truly carry. Empathy, as it's usually celebrated, has been smoothed down to something digestible, but the truth is rarely so clean. The empath I've seen, not in memes or motivational quotes, but in dreams and rituals and moments of soul-deep clarity, is not smiling. They are trembling under a weight they don't understand. They don't know where the pain ends and where they begin, and that lack of clarity is dangerous. I once dreamt of a woman on a narrow bridge above a deep void. She had no eyes. Her arms stretched outward as if reaching for help or pushing something away. Below her, unseen voices called out in anguish. She couldn't see them, but her body bent and twisted as if reacting to every scream. That woman, blind to the source of her suffering, is the empath, the one who becomes the vessel for energies unnamed and unclaimed. She doesn't realize that what she's feeling isn't hers. And in that confusion, she begins to identify with it. That is the slow erosion of self that so many sensitive souls endure. Take a moment now, if this has already touched something in you, and comment below with the words, "Today I can." Let it be an affirmation, a first thread back to your center. There is no innocence in the unconscious. When an empath opens themselves up, willingly or not, they become a container for unresolved shadow energy. Most people wander through life unaware of the darkness they trail behind them. And when they encounter someone porous, someone without inner boundaries, that shadow leaps. It finds a home.
I recall an old African tale passed down in dream traditions about a child who heard spirits crying near the forest. The spirits never spoke in words, only waves of emotion, grief, terror, hunger for connection. The child began to laugh in silence, cry in stillness, tremble in peace. The tribe feared she was possessed, but an elder, wise and rooted, showed her how to speak with these spirits, not to cast them out, but to name them. That is the path of the empowered empath, not one who absorbs blindly, but one who gives language to what was buried. To say I feel what others feel is only the beginning. You must ask, why? Where does it enter me? And what is it doing to my own essence? Because unchecked empathy becomes a form of possession. Not demonic, no, but archetypal, quiet, subtle. It might come disguised as overwhelming compassion, or a need to save, or even love for someone whose pain is sinking you. and yet you stay not because of love, but because their suffering has attached itself to your soul like a vine. Like a psychic magnet, empaths often fall in love with those who are unraveling, not because they are naive, but because they are entangled in wounds that aren't theirs to heal. And they mistake that ache for purpose. But the healer becomes the harmed. The savior becomes the sacrificial lamb. And the longer they stay unaware, the more they forget who they were before the merging began. And hey, if this message is resonating, don't forget to like this video. That tiny action helps us spread these truths further. Your gift is not just emotional, it is psychic, archetypal. You feel not only people, but their lineage, their traumas, their unlived dreams. And unless you've made peace with your own shadow, those energies will overwhelm you. There's a spiritual seduction in sensitivity. People glorify being empathic as though it were pure light, but all light casts shadow. Repressed rage, unspoken grief, these don't vanish, they wait. And when they find someone like you, someone open and unguarded, they jump, they ignite, and the empath burns with a fire not their own. I treated a woman once who cried at the threshold of every session. Before a word was spoken, the tears would come. At first, she believed they were hers, memories of love, loss, regret. But with time, we saw deeper. She was grieving not only for herself, but for the generations before her, women who were never allowed to cry. She had inherited a lineage of suppressed sorrow, and in doing so, had forgotten how to access her own voice. To be an empath without awareness is to walk through life with the ghost of others whispering in your ear. Not just one or two, but dozens, hundreds. And unless you start to name them, to return what was never yours, you will drown. The sacredness of empathy demands a structure. You cannot carry fire in your bare hands. It must be held by a vessel. And you, dear empath, are the vessel. But unless you remember this, the fire will consume you.
There's another dream I must share. A man stands in a cathedral made entirely of mirrors. With each step, he hears voices that don't belong to him. He looks into one mirror, expecting to see his reflection, but sees instead a crying child. In another, a screaming soldier. In another, a grieving mother. He searches desperately for his own face, crying out, "Which one is me?" But the mirrors only echo his confusion. That is the life of an unconscious empath, lost in the reflections of others, unable to find their own form amidst the noise. So I ask you, have you done the work to know yourself? Not the shallow affirmations or personality quizzes, but true descent into your own psyche. Have you stood in the caves of your wounds and asked the hard questions? Have you seen the ways you use empathy to feel worthy, to feel holy, to feel safe? Have you touched the part of you that needs to be needed? Because even that desire to help, to soothe, to fix, it can carry shadow. And sometimes the act of giving becomes a mask we wear to avoid the silence of facing our own brokenness. True empathy is not performance, it is presence. And that presence requires boundaries. Not the walls of avoidance, but the firm, loving membrane of a soul that knows where it ends and the other begins. To say, "I feel you, but I do not become you." To say, "I see your wound, but I do not bleed for it." That is love with a backbone. And this is not coldness. It is warmth, grounded in clarity. To sit beside someone in their pain without being consumed by it, that is mastery. That is alchemy. There's an image that often returns to me.
An old well deep in a forest, surrounded by empaths, weeping into its mouth. In the depths, the shadows of those they love writhe and whisper. The empaths believe that if they cry enough, care enough, they might lift those shadows into the light. But the well has no bottom, and the tears only feed the darkness. Because not every soul wants healing. Not everyone is ready for light. And the empath who believes they must rescue everyone becomes a martyr to illusions. In trying to pull others out, they fall in too. So you must ask yourself, does your empathy liberate, or does it entrap? Does it honor the other's path, or does it impose your will upon it, disguised as care? Even compassion can become control when it's rooted in fear. Parents who love too tightly, lovers who merge too deeply, friends who become saviors instead of mirrors. This is not the path of freedom. This is the shadow of the empath, where love becomes obligation and care becomes currency. But don't recoil. Don't turn away in shame. This is not condemnation. This is the beginning of integration. Because true empathy doesn't dissolve the self, it strengthens it. And once you begin that return, once you reclaim your own boundaries, your voice, your identity, you begin to shift. You stop absorbing. You start witnessing. You stop rescuing. You start reflecting.
You become someone who can stand in the middle of another storm without being swept away. This doesn't mean you stop feeling. Quite the opposite. You feel more, but differently. You feel with wisdom. You feel with choice. You are no longer dragged. You walk. I once had a dream of a woman standing before a fire. All around her, chaos screamed, winds howled, shadows spun through the air like leaves in a storm. But she was still. In her hands, a bowl of water, her own tears. She lowered the bowl to the earth and whispered, not to the storm, but to herself, "I feel you, but I am not you." And the storm began to still. Not because she fought it, not because she absorbed it, but because she claimed her own sovereignty. That, right there, is the new path of the empath. Not the sponge, but the vessel. Not the martyr, but the mystic. Not the rescuer, but the mirror. If this resonates with you so far, take a moment and subscribe if you haven't already. Here we speak what others are too afraid to name. The true empath does not collapse under the weight of feeling. They rise because of it. Not because they are hardened, but because they have rooted. They've walked through the fire of their own trauma, met their inner child, made peace with their inner shadows, and returned with strength that no longer needs to prove itself through pain. Dreams reveal what we often avoid in the daylight. And for empaths, they speak with a clarity that cuts through illusion. I remember a young man who came to me exhausted, not physically, but spiritually. Every room he entered left him heavier. Every conversation felt like a sponge soaking him dry. He told me of a dream. He stood before the mouth of a dark cave. Inside, the voices of every person he'd ever tried to save echoed, sorrowful, aching, unresolved. Faces he loved floated by, calling his name. He tried to run, but something rooted him in place. From deep within the cave, a whisper came, not loud, but clear. "You made this your temple." And he had, without realizing it. He had built an altar out of pain, not to worship it, but to survive it. In his attempt to save others, he abandoned himself. Empathy is holy when conscious, but when unconscious, it becomes contamination.
It is the flooding of your inner space with emotional debris that was never yours to hold. And sometimes that residue runs deep across generations. I have seen artists, intuitives, and healers haunted by sensitivities passed down like sacred burdens. A woman whose great-grandmother served as a village oracle now feels crushed in crowded rooms. A man whose ancestors were persecuted for their gifts now hides his intuition beneath anxiety. In dreams, these unresolved inheritances often appear as symbols: serpents at the heart, oceans consuming children, houses burning without water to douse them. These are not personal dramas. They are archetypical messages, warnings. You are overflowing with what was never yours to hold.
One of my patients, a sculptor, had a recurring dream. She walked through a museum filled with statues of people from her life. Each bore a plaque, "Do not touch, property of the dead." But she touched them anyway, and every time they bled. Her empathy had become necromancy, a reaching into the past to resuscitate wounds that should have been laid to rest. Unconscious empaths often become emotional gravediggers, haunted, overrun, unable to discern what needs witnessing and what needs burial. But not all pain seeks healing. Some seeks extinction. And to interrupt that process is not kindness, it's spiritual interference. So, should we harden ourselves? Shut down? Numb our hearts? No. We must refine our empathy. Not remove it, but evolve it. From sponge to sword. From martyrdom to mysticism. The true empath is not fragile. They are forged, initiated, tempered in shadow. They have stood before their own pain and chosen not to flee. They have met their unmet needs, sat in silence, allowed themselves to not be needed. And because of that, they no longer mistake absorption for love. They can feel without drowning, witness without absorbing, love without losing. And in that, their gift becomes radiant, not a liability, but a light. They walk not as healers of all wounds, but as reminders of wholeness. But as they rise, a new danger emerges, subtle, seductive, the magician. The one who sees deeply, who manipulates energy, who speaks to shadows without blinking. But if this figure forgets humility, wisdom becomes control, insight becomes dominance, and empathy becomes manipulation. So be vigilant. Awakening is not a medal, it is a responsibility. Every day, ask yourself, is this mine? Am I feeling or fusing? Am I helping or performing? Am I present or proving something? These are not doubts. These are maturity. The conscious empath doesn't panic in uncertainty. They pause. They listen. They allow others to break without rushing in. They trust the natural intelligence of the soul. And in relationships, everything shifts. Unconscious empaths are drawn to chaos, not because they are broken, but because their inner child still believes love must be earned through suffering. They confuse intensity with connection. But the awakened empath, they seek clarity. They choose presence over pain. They are drawn to those who see them, not just need them. And if loneliness comes, they sit with it. They don't fill it with ghosts. They understand no is not rejection. It is self-respect. I once dreamt of a still lake, silver and endless. On its shores stood many versions of me. Some wept, some waited. In the center, a figure stood alone, calm, whole, untouched.
Everyone who looked into their eyes saw not wounds, but potential. That is the awakened empath. Not a mirror for pain, but for possibility. Not a martyr, but a soul. Not a rescuer, but a presence. Not here to carry the suffering of the world, but to walk with integrity, so that the world remembers its own strength.
So if these words speak to something in you, let them do more than resonate. Let them transform. Step away from what was never yours. Name what once controlled you. Honor your sensitivity, not with exhaustion, but with structure. Because you are not a sponge. You are not a sacrifice. You are not broken for the comfort of others. You are a living threshold where energy becomes meaning, where pain is witnessed, not absorbed, where empathy is refined into wisdom. And if you can carry this sacred clarity, you will not only survive, you will sanctify. You will walk among the suffering and not be swallowed by it. You will feel deeply and still remain whole. And most of all, you will return to yourself, not as a rescuer, but as a soul.